Someone was dressed up like this. Someone was dressed up like this. It was a small child. Otherwise, I wouldn't have tackled it and broken its rib cage or whatever I did to it.
You want to know who this generation's iconic yellow guy is? Well, it's Sonichu. I don't like it any more than you do, but I don't think this is a point that can be contested. I know you wanted it to be Yellow Guy from Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, or Yellow Man from Smiling Friends, but those guys are the Duckman to Sonichu's Simpsons. They're far too hip, too niche to qualify as the iconic defining characters of an era. And no, Sonichu is not too niche to qualify. Every time I post a picture of Yellow Guy or Charlie to Facebook, someone asks what it's from. Nobody needs to ask nothing when you Photoshop a Sonichu medallion onto Kanye West or whatever. Here's the main thrust of my argument. I think the iconic Yellow Guy is determined by the information technology of any given era. Think about it. Woodstock for color television, Pac-Man for video games, and for cheap color printing at a mass market scale, you have who I think we can easily count as the first iconic Yellow Guy, the Yellow Kid. If you've never heard of this guy, here's the dude from Pawn Stars reciting the Wikipedia entry on the character and pretending he knows this shit off the top of his head.
It was like the first comic strip to really use like the bubbles that come out. Everything he said was written on a shirt. It was really weird. It was pretty common for kids to be bald because that's how you took care of lice. The neatest thing about the comic strip is that's where the term yellow journalism came from. No, I'll give you $175. No one else is going to buy it. No one else knows what it is.
The Yellow Kid was drawn by Richard Felton Outcalt, a graduate of the McMicken University School of Design in Cincinnati. Outcalt was able to make a living as a full-time commercial artist right away, claiming, among other clients, Edison Laboratories, for whom he would paint electric light displays and create mechanical illustrations. The history of color inserts in newspapers goes back to 1891 when the Milwaukee Journal had a special red and blue page printed to commemorate an election. In 92, the Chicago Inter-Ocean added a color supplement, and Joseph Pulitzer copied suit, investing in a four-color printing press. In early 1893, Pulitzer began running the first funny pages, a full-color insert for Sunday papers. So full color was driven as much by technological innovation as by competition. In this instance, color printing had been possible for quite a while, but it wasn't worth the expense until the other guys started doing it. I don't give a shit about the Yellow Kid. You always come back to this character when you're studying the history of Western cartooning, but I don't think he's all that funny or all that interesting. He was a doofy little bald-headed hoe in a yellow shirt. Who cares? But he's the first example of an iconic yellow character in popular culture, at least in the mass media era. And I think he sets the template going forward. Specifically, that these guys come along when there's a perfect storm of culture and entertainment technology. To be iconic, of course, he has to reflect public interest at the time, as the Yellow Kid did with his political commentary. And to be yellow, he has to exist in a medium that really allows that color to pop. So I'm arguing here that iconic yellow guys occur when you get this perfect crossing of cultural and technological wires. The Yellow Kid qualifies as iconic, having appeared all over everything from cigarette packs to, well, bath soap. But he was surprisingly short-lived in his administration as the main yellow guy, with the kid's strip ending in 1889, so a measly 4 or 5 year run. And this, by the way, I think squashes the idea that each decade has its own iconic yellow guy. Yellow Kid was introduced in the mid-90s and retired before the decade was over. A new yellow guy doesn't appear arbitrarily at the start of a decade. He appears when the technology is developed and then made accessible at a broad enough level that the guy can permeate popular culture. And I think we gotta skip ahead here by a few decades to find the next yellow guy, because after comics, I don't think another medium would adopt full color in a meaningful way until film, specifically animation. Donald Duck. I'm counting Donald as a yellow guy, even though he's mostly white, because his yellowness is critical to his design, and it was made possible by full color animation. Everything about Mickey Mouse works in black and white. With Donald Duck, the yellow of his bill and the white of his feathers would lack definition without full color. Like the Yellow Kid, Donald debuted mid-decade in 1934's The Wise Little Hen. Color film exists prior to the 1930s, and smartasses love to point out Kinemacolor movies when you say that Wizard of Oz was the first color film. But what we consider to be true full color starts in 1932, when Walt Disney began working with Technicolor, debuting the 3-strip technique in Flowers and Trees. 3-strip involves photographing each animation cell 3 times with red, green, and blue filters. This was a subtractive color process, by the way, so yellow would be achieved by combining red and green, making Freddy Krueger the true yellow guy of the 80s. Just kidding. Alongside Walt Disney, Dick Lundy is credited as a co-creator of Donald Duck, but he wouldn't animate the character until his second appearance in Orphan's Benefit. The Donald Duck we know and love, short-tempered and egotistical, was all down to Dick Lundy's interpretation of Clarence Nash's voice acting. Do I need to make an argument that Donald Duck is an iconic symbol of early cartoons? It's the first name you've recognized on this list. Anyway, live-action film would be next to adopt full color, using the same 3-strip Technicolor method as Walt's Silly Symphonies. And I'm not going to fidget fuck around about the details and technicalities. The first full-color movie was The Wizard of Oz. The Cowardly Lion. If you think photographing an animation cell 3 times sounds like hard work, wait till you hear how they got the Cowardly Lion in full color. The Technicolor camera recorded on 3 strips at once through a beam-splitting prism, combining the strips when printing the final reel. These cameras were enormous. They had to be rented rather than bought, and their use had to be supervised by a color supervisor who would help to make sure that costume and set design didn't exceed the limits of the system. Technicolor cameras were less sensitive to light than conventional cameras, which meant that the stage lights had to be that much brighter. So imagine the sweltering heat on that Wizard of Oz set, especially if you're wearing a heavy fur suit. The temperature reportedly exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 Celsius, and many performers on the film report permanent eye damage. The expenses involved in maintaining this system blew the budgets up to astronomical levels. Wizard of Oz cost around $2.8 million to produce, or around $61 million today. There's not a whole lot I can say about The Wizard of Oz that hasn't been said, but if we're counting iconic yellow guys, nobody's put more sweat into making this list than Bert Lahr. Woodstock. As far back as the late 1940s, they were filming TV shows in color just to make sure that they would be ready for the transition in the near future. The Lone Ranger and The Adventures of Superman were both shot in color, even though they would be broadcast in black and white to black and white television sets. Color televisions were available in the 1950s, but these sets tended to be much larger than black and white TV sets. In 1966, General Electric released the lightweight Portacolor, which would facilitate wider adoption of color television in the home. In 1972, color TV sales finally surpassed black and white sales for the first time. You know what else happened in 1972? Snoopy Come Home was released in theaters, marking the introduction of Woodstock, Snoopy's little yellow bird friend, to the animated Peanuts canon. The character had debuted in the strip in 1967, but wasn't officially named until 1970 after the music festival. So the bird actually predates the festival from which it got its name. Snoopy even referred to Woodstock as a hippie at times, and I think Charles Schulz intended Woodstock as an optimistic caricature of the Flower Child generation, that second wave of hippies who were too young to have taken part in the 60s, but who carried those values into the 70s and 80s. When I was a kid, I went to a rainbow gathering and got dysentery. That was apparently a pretty famous incident, but it's probably why my outlook on hippies isn't as glowing as Schultz's. I like shitting in private, drinking clean water, and commune is just a nice word for cult. Anyway. Pac-Man. With printing, film, and television having already adopted full color, the only frontier left in 1980 would be video games. The first full-color video game was probably 1972's Gotcha. We could split hairs about who was the first on-screen video game character, someone who wasn't just a spaceship, a stick figure, or a dot on a screen, but Pac-Man was at least the first playable video game character with a clearly legible face. famously inspired by a pizza with a slice missing. With the animated cutscenes and wide open mouth, Pac-Man was like a primitive version of L.A. Noire in that it represented a new horizon, not so much in graphical fidelity but in expressiveness. Pac-Man read like a comic strip or a cartoon, with the terrified bug-eyed ghosts fleeing your avatar and Pac-Man giddily eating up little pellets. This gets at a key feature of the iconic yellow guy. He doesn't simply represent color for color's sake. He's not a harbinger of a technological breakthrough in the sense of like doubling the frame rate and frying your motherboard when nobody can tell the difference between 60 and 120 frames per second in the first place. The yellow guy is a walking Waka-ing tech demo illustrating that a medium has arrived at a new plateau in reflecting the human experience. There's plenty of ways to describe the stick figures of earlier arcade games, but if you called them hungry, you were just joking about how skinny they are. Pac-Man's big greedy mouth hit some button in the player's mind that made you want to feed him, and I don't think it's a stretch to say this is a big part of why Pac-Man was the most addictive game of its era. The 90s. I don't think the Simpsons count as iconic yellow guys. For one, their status as yellow is not significant in the world of The Simpsons. That's just what honkies look like in Springfield. There are other ducks in Disney cartoons, but Donald Duck's yellowness stands out against Goofy and Mickey, as does Woodstock's against Snoopy. Pac-Man's yellowness stands out against the black backdrops of the maze and the multicolored ghosts. Bart's yellowness doesn't stand out against Homer's, Marge's, or Lisa's, and that's another thing. How do you name someone the iconic yellow guy of their era when they're just one part of a family dynamic? If you ask me, the iconic yellow guy of the 90s was the AOL dial-up guy. But he's not all that expressive, and I've never seen him on a t-shirt, so really I think next in line is Pikachu. As with every other medium we've been exploring here, full color goes back a few years farther than the iconic yellow guy. It's not the technological innovation itself, but the perfect storm of tech, culture, and accessibility that births a yellow guy. The Game Gear came out in 1990, and the Game Boy Color didn't come out until 8 years later.
Hey, there's an easier way to get color.
But the Game Boy has sold more than 100 million units across both versions, and the Game Gear, with its short battery life and limited library, has sold just 10 million units across the entire life cycle. Now, here's something you might not remember, or maybe you do, because Pokemon lore seems to be the one thing that's universal across all generations under 50. Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow were released on the Game Boy, but they were programmed with a special color palette so that when you plug it into the Game Boy Color, you'd get that charming mustard yellow. It's kind of funny to think that it wasn't even that long ago this was considered mind-blowing. The Game Boy Color launched in 1998, and the first iPhone came out in 2007, not even a full decade later. As we move more and more into the present day, there's less to be said about these characters that hasn't been said. Pokemon was a major hit because it combined charming character designs with addictive RPG and collectathon elements and blah blah blah, etc., multimedia empire, and so on and so forth. You know, my favorite game by Satoshi Tajiri is the action puzzler Mendel Palace. Underrated NES classic. Give it a try sometime. Anyway, here's the part you were dreading, or looking forward to if you're nasty. Sonichu. Sonichu is the focal point of what has really been the defining medium for older Zoomers and younger millennials. The YouTube rabbit hole. Here, once more, the technology predates the character's peak in popularity by some years, but the cultural obsession with Sonichu resulted from a perfect storm of factors. Everyone working at home during the pandemic freed up a lot of time for watching YouTube, spurring on a trend towards longer and longer videos. Add to that, video production tools becoming more and more accessible, lowering the bar for which subjects will or won't justify an 80-hour documentary. Imagine pitching a Chris Chan series to the Independent Film Channel back in 2012 or something. they'd give you blank stares and then try to explain to you that they're pretty sure Nintendo owns Pokemon. Personally, I don't really care that much about this motherfucker, so the end. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.